How are you? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? The how are you tells you that I come from a place called the Bronx. And one of our claims to fame is that people born and brought up in the Bronx are the only people in the world who can say, I don't have an accent. And the other thing about the Bronx, there are only two places in the world that have "the" in front of them. One is the Bronx, and the other is the Vatican. And I'm associated with both of those places. It's an honor and a privilege to be in your beautiful presence. And I got to be in your beautiful presence because a marvelous and wonderful man named Maurice, you may call him Maurice, but I call him Maurice. He called me and invited me to come to beautiful Ocean City to share my experience, strength, and hope. And we've had a few wonderful conversations on the telephone, Maurice and Maurice. There was a little confusion when I was checking in at the desk of the Ramada, because the clerk kept saying, well, you're Maurice, but then there's Maurice. So we kind of straightened it out. So I thank you for Maurice and the committee for their service. And it's one thing to say, let's have a convention, let's have this, let's have that, but then we need the trusted servants to put their hands to the plow. And I've been very, very impressed with what I've experienced thus far. It's nice to be invited. There was a time in my life when people stopped inviting me. I used to go anyway. And then I'd make a 30-day retreat wondering why they didn't invite me back. So to be invited today, it's very, very special to me. And I thank you for that. Last night, we were wondering about the mic, and I was reminded of a story of the bishop who was going around from place to place, and he came to the last church, and he was just about to offer Mass when someone came to him and said, the mic isn't working, we have to wait a few minutes. And he said, no problem. So a few minutes later, somebody came and said, Bishop, you can begin the Mass now, the mic is ready. And he got up to the mic, and he knew as soon as he got up there that the mic was not working. So he says, there's something the matter with this mic. And the congregation responds, and also with you. I was a first grade teacher for many, many years. 3 years on Route 50 in Easton, in a school called St. Peter and Paul. And if any of my first grade pupils are here, please make sure you see me before you leave. I taught there for 3 years. It was a marvelous and wonderful experience in many ways. And every once in a while, I think about going back to teach first grade someplace. And then I get things like this. These came from little first graders in today's times. God bless America through the night with a light from a bulb. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the whole East Coast. While shepherds washed their socks by night. I led the pigeons to the flag. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of the loom. So I think I'll keep doing what I'm doing a day at a time. I'd like to thank each of you for coming to be with me on this, the most important day of my life. It's not my birthday. It's not the anniversary of anything in particular. It's just simply the only day I have. And when people come to be with you at such a significant time in your life, like the only day you have, you try to remember them. At least I do. And I'll try to remember you because you're here with me on this, the most important day of my life. If you don't remember anything I shared this evening, please remember this, because this is how I want to be remembered, since it's the most important thing about me at any point on a clock. I'm an alcoholic, which means 1 brandy, 2 brandies, 3 brandies, floor. I'm a woman. I'm a member of a religious community. I'm an RN, a real nun. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing, in particular the Forest Hills group in Queens, New York. That's my home group. And the last thing I tell you about myself is my name. My name is Sister Maurice. One of the things that I'm partial to in our fellowship is that it's a fellowship of equals. There are no titles in Alcoholics Anonymous. No one really cares what you do for a living. I love that expression, fellowship of equals. I don't think there's another outfit in society that can claim fellowship of equals like we can. At least we'd match any other group that's out there. And yet, you have never been anything else in this fellowship other than Sister Maurice. Isn't that a title? I see it as my name. It's on all my important papers. It's on my driver's license. It's the name I've been using most of my life. It's written up quite well, 2 police stations, City of New York. But moreover, it's the name that I gave to you when I came into your beautiful presence a while back now. A call had been made for me, and I was to go to the Forest Hills group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I really wasn't quite sure that someone of my class and caliber should be going to such a place as AA. So I was not a happy camper when I came. But little by slowly, thanks to you, that has all changed for me. So much so that I can say quite comfortably today, I choose to live the AA way of life. For a few years I said, I have to go to AA, I gotta go to AA, I better go to AA. But you know what? I don't have to, gotta, or better. I choose to live the AA way of life. And when I talk about something being a way of life, it's not an incidental experience. It's not something I do when the Spirit moves me. A way of life to me is as much a part of me as my right hand and my left hand. And that's the way I see Alcoholics Anonymous today. But for starters, I went to this first meeting. I went up the stairs, down the stairs, into a little room. There was one man in the room. He took a look at me, came running across the room, grabbed my hand, told me who he was, and then he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Me?" He said, "Yeah, what's your name?" I said, "I'm Sister Maurice." Now this man didn't say to me, "We'll have a group conscience meeting and I'll get back to you." The very next thing the man said was, "Hi, Sister Maurice, you're welcome." And in my over 34 years in the fellowship, no one has even suggested that I call myself anything else. The name is important. It's mine. But the most important thing about me, at any point on a clock, is what I told you first and foremost. I am an alcoholic. And each and every time I say that, beginning first, when I awaken in the morning, I don't know how you sleep. Of course I don't. But I sleep primarily on my right side. And when I awaken in the morning, I don't even know I have two eyes, because this one's buried in the pillow. Before I go looking for this eye, the very first thing I do, I announce before my God, I am an alcoholic. It sets the tone here. It puts me on the right wavelength. And any time thereafter that I say I'm an alcoholic, I am reminded that of all the things I do each day that God gives me, my most important job, work, task, assignment is that I stay sober. And I do that best through the principles and traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous as they have been written. When I came to you a while back, you gave me a book, and you called it Big. I thought it was an interesting way you described the book. The gal who gave it to me was much shorter than I was, and she stood out in front of me and she said, "Here is a big book." No coincidence, I'm very farsighted, and I saw some fellows over there putting some shiny signs on the wall. And my eye hit upon the one that said, "Keep it simple." And as sick and all as I was able to make a connection. And I said to myself, wouldn't dare say it to the lady, "Boy, do these people practice what they preach." Because you can't get much simpler than that. Here is a big book. Of course, now we have the paperback version, which I call the small big book. I don't call it the small book, and I don't call it the little book. I call it the small big book. Because there's another book in the bookstore in the mall called the small book. And it talks about being an alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I call ours the small, big book. Well, you know, you introduce anything new in AA, they send for you. This fella came to me one night, he had a small, big book, and he's pacing up and down, he's saying, "Hey, sister, you call this the small, big book?" I said, "I do." He said, "That's a contradiction." I said, "What do you mean, contradiction?" He said, "Small, big, small, big." I thought for a moment, and I said, "Well, we have had jumbo shrimp for years." If you didn't get that, you could talk to your sponsor. I took the book from you, the one that you called big, and this is what you said to me. You told me I should read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I should study the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I should believe what I found there. I should share what I believe, and I should practice what I share. And then you said we suggest you do that along with the people who know how to do it best. And you called that outfit the fellowship. And then you put the whole thing together and you said, that is a design for living that really works. What did I know about anything? I said, let me see what I can do. And that design for living has worked so well for this lady here that I don't spend a fleeting moment of my precious time looking around for alternative ways to go. I need all the help I can get, believe you me. But it is always as a secondary measure to the program. Alcohol became a way of life for me in a very short period of time. It dictated my moods, it made my decisions, it said you will, and it said you won't. I found it very hard to eventually surrender to the fact that whenever the first drink of alcohol went into this body, mind, and spirit, two things happened. One, I didn't know how many more I was going to have. Two, I didn't know what my behavior would be like. However, in those days, if you said to me, "Sister, how many drinks did you have or will you have?" I would have said 2, because that's what a lady should have. And if you said to me, "What was your behavior like or what will it be like?" I would have said, "Steady as you go," because that's how I saw myself. I was a first grade teacher at the time, and I had the reputation in those days of being the best teacher in the school. When the children came to first grade after Labor Day each September, by the end of September, my kids were ready for college. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'd be working real hard with these kids, and something would start in my body, mind, and spirit. And it would be screaming in there, "You need a drink!" And the very next thing I would do, morning after morning, I would put up against the screaming what people told me I had so much of, and that was willpower. And the willpower approach was futile. And I went on to learn, and I'm glad I did, that it wasn't that I was a weak-willed individual, but rather I was a diseased person. I was a sick, untreated alcoholic. And when you are in that condition, it goes beyond the strength of your will to do other than to satisfy what's going on in there. So I'd move to the next phase of the game plan. And I'd say, well, it's a couple of minutes after 10. These kids can go out to the bathroom. Then they can have their snack. I'll get the teacher next door to keep an eye on them, because I'm a responsible teacher. And then I'll run over to the convent, get a drink, be back when this is all over. And I'd be running across the yard to the convent, morning after morning. And this would be my thought. This is going to be my last drink, at least until I've done my day's work. I was too sick to recall in those days that at 5 a.m., when the big bell went off to get us into our day, my story goes back to old God's time before we went mod. And we had this bell that went off at 5 a.m. And for me to get into anything in those days, I had to reach over from my bed and take that drink. And I hated doing that. And each and every time I did it, I would say, this is going to be my last drink, at least until I've done my day's work. So whenever I would take the first one, everything would center around, when am I going to get the next one? And yet, if you met me along the way and you said, sister, who or what is the center of your life? I would have been insulted by the question. You just called me sister. You see how I'm dressed, every piece from stem to stern. You just saw me come out of that building called convent, and you're asking me who's the center of my life. How come you don't know the center of my life is God? And I would have been insulted by the question. Today, I choose to live honestly as best I can, thanks to you. And I have no problem in sharing with you that somewhere along the journey, the focus in my life shifted. And it shifted from God to that next drink. And I justified the use of alcohol in my life. I might say, too, because maybe someone needs to hear it. It was not one of my goals in life to become an alcoholic. I do not recall getting up a dark and gloomy day or a bright and sunny day saying, today's the day, alky by 6 tonight. I'll destroy me and see how many I can take with me. I do not see alcoholism as self-inflicted. I believe it is a sickness that comes to a person. That's my opinion. I think it's a marvelous and wonderful idea that we have steps that suggest to us that in God's time we make amends because we are accountable. But I don't hold myself responsible for the sickness that came to me. However, I hold myself very, very, very responsible for the precious life-giving gift of sobriety that has been given to me. I did not get sober. I tried to get sober. I couldn't pull it off. I don't believe a person can get sober. That's my opinion. I believe something bigger, greater, outside of the person takes place. They call it a miracle. And I believe the precious life-giving gift of sobriety is given. And I believe it's given by one bigger, greater than all of us put together. So I feel very responsible to take care of the precious life-giving gift of sobriety that God has given me. So much so that I have no problem in sharing with you. If you should ever hear that Maurice is back drinking, please, please, don't call me a victim. Call me a volunteer. And the very next thing you should say, somewhere along the line, she wasn't willing to do everything necessary to stay sober. I cannot plead ignorance today. You have taught me and taught me well how to take care of the precious, life-giving gift of sobriety each day that God gives me. Going back to the scene in the bed with the eye in the pillow, the second thing I do each morning before I go looking for the eye, I pray the Lord's Prayer. And when I reach the part of the prayer that says, give us this day our daily bread, I emphasize the word daily because I want to remind myself, I will have sufficient bread, sufficient help for the day. He will not refuse anyone who asks for the bread, for the help, but he gives it a day at a time. It is my responsibility then to take the help and to use it to take care of the gift of sobriety for the rest of that day. There are advantages to years of sobriety. I've had them. But as the years of sobriety increase, so do the perils of smugness. Complacency is a killer. The little sheep that strays from the flock is usually the one that's found in the ditch over the embankment hanging from the barbed wire fence. A favorite fruit of mine is a banana. And every time I eat a banana, I have a meditation. And the meditation is, the banana that leaves the bunch is the one that gets skinned. I've a drunkalogue that tells you quite well that all by myself I can stay very sick and quite drunk. But I truly believe I cannot stay sober and fairly well without you. Well, how do you really know that, Maurice? You've never left us. When God was giving out ears, I thought he said beers, and I said 2 large ones. I am an excellent listener to the experiences of other people. I was affected physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally from this sickness. Physically, I fared out pretty well. There were times I tried to arrange my own physical death. I used to take the car, leave the Bronx, go across the George Washington Bridge, up the Parkway into Jersey. And I would pull over where you could sightsee. And I would say, when those cars are gone, when those folks are gone, I'm going to run this car over the embankment because I don't know what's the matter with me. And then I'd have what I call today a moment of amazing grace. And I'd say, I'll go get a drink. I'll come back and do this another time. So I was not to die physically, but there are other ways of dying I'm sure you can identify. I suffered the death of my values. I suffered the death of my integrity. I suffered the death of everything I stood for as a woman, everything I stood for as a sister. All those areas of my life died. Outwardly, I looked pretty good, held a job, did it fairly well, tried to keep up with my responsibilities, and above all, I always said my prayers. No matter what shape I was in, I was always praying away. And some of you have shared with me that you thought you missed the boat because you didn't pray enough. Listen, I prayed enough for you and all belonging to you. So this disease must be so big that something as powerful as prayer will not take it away. I don't believe you can just pray your way through alcoholism. And yet we say, where would we be without prayer? Prayer is a path where there is none. But I think for folks like you and me, there's another piece that goes with the prayer. Pray and row the boat. And this beautiful way of life, this design for living, enables us to do that, to pray and to row the boat. I denied that alcohol was my problem, and I was somewhat relieved when I learned that denial is the major presenting symptom of alcoholism. And when you're in denial, you're not in touch with reality. What I knew about my situation would fit on a postage stamp. What was happening in my life was as big as the state of Maryland. But if I didn't have it here when it was presented, then it didn't happen. Now, I had hundreds of people talk to me about my drinking. The nerve of that one coming in here and talking to me about my drinking. I just couldn't see it. And there were many times that I exercised the denial. My mother was in the hospital in New York City having a total hip operation. She was there a long, long time. The operation wasn't as perfected then as it is today. Now I think they do it going up and down in the elevator. I went every day to be at my mother's bedside because that's where a good daughter should be. And one day my beautiful mother, beautiful Irish, soft-spoken lady, she said in a whisper, "If you don't come tomorrow, it'll be just fine. You must have a lot of work to do around the convent and the school. Why don't you skip a few days?" And I sat there thinking, wow, there she is with all her pain, and she's thinking of me. But I know today, because I'm in touch with reality, that my beautiful mother could not bring herself to say, "You're an embarrassment to me. You're no help to me. I don't need you around this hospital drunk." Now, I have one sister, and she's also a sister. Yet I don't call her sister. Yet she's my sister. Do you understand that? And during my active alcoholism, my sister secretly wished she joined a missionary community and lived in Mexico. It's very hard to be proud of a sick, untreated alcoholic. I know that today. I didn't know it then. My sister came to the hospital to visit my mother. She gave me one of those come outside the door kind of winks. I dutifully went outside. I figured she needed my advice, my opinion. She's very, very tall. And like my mother, she's a very soft-spoken, beautiful lady. And in a whisper, she says to me, "Why? Why would you come to this hospital at 4 o'clock in the afternoon drinking?" I was just about to give a lecture when it dawned on me. We've been down this road 100 times before. To the best of my recollection, not a word did I speak. But being a typical alcoholic, and that's all that I am, couldn't let well enough alone. So I took my right hand, the more powerful of my two, and I belted her. Shortly thereafter, 2 nurses came running down the hall and they are yelling, "Sisters, sisters!" They were not calling us sisters because we were related by blood. But we were dressed like sisters used to dress, some still dress today. My veil was on the floor, hers was someplace else. Now, I learned a few years later that one of the major rules in this hospital is that no patient leaves their room unescorted. They were coming out crutches, wheelchairs, all fours. Of course, the word got around quickly. There were 2 nuns out there killing one another. Now, in the midst of this chaos, I had a couple of thoughts. Interesting enough, I did not have the thought, maybe I shouldn't have belted her. I did not have the thought, maybe I shouldn't have had the last drink before I came down here. My major thought, as I'm looking up at my sister, is, why did she scream? Well, do you know, I look back today with a sober, clear head. Do you know it's perfectly normal? You belt someone, they let out a whoop. The other concern I had, my purse had fallen onto the floor, making a rather loud sound as it fell to the floor. I was a little distracted with the purse. I wasn't too concerned about the few dollars in the purse. I have a vow of poverty. I kept it quite well during this time. But I was very concerned about the pint of holy water in the purse. 1 pint of Christian Brothers brandy. And what is the thinking of a sick, untreated alcoholic? No one leaves here with that purse other than you know who. Now, there is only one word to describe someone who'd be in that position. And I had to go through a lot of other descriptions before, with your help, I could get to what's proper, right, and fitting. And if there's anyone in this gathering tonight who still sees themselves in this first grouping, I would suggest that you leave that thinking here tonight, because it does not apply. I had to go through bad, hopeless, weak-willed, sinner, you should know better. But the way I would describe someone today would be sick, unwell, not playing with full deck. That's respectful. Or I heard a fellow one night at a meeting, he described himself, he said he was a quart low. I heard another fellow another night, he said he had a photogenic mind. He just never had any film in the camera. Well, I had to go a ways before I could see myself as sick and unwell. If you drink and you drive, you might miss the mark. I was always behind the wheel of a car. It was an insult to show on your face that you would drive us home. I brought you there, I bring you home. And as sick and all as I was, it never ceased to amaze me that after we'd have the big hoop-de-doos about the fact that I shouldn't be driving, I'd get behind the wheel and they'd all get in the car. My first accident, July of 1970, my good friend, Sister Rose, was in court over the dismissal of a teacher from her school. She had a prominent lawyer appointed by the diocese, and I said, I'll be in court to help the lawyer help Rose. Now, how do we affect the people on the other side of the coin? The night before the trial, Rose called me up. She said, Maurice, please don't come to court. My thinking was, wow, there she is with all her pain, and she's thinking of me. Well, I have heard Rose share her beautiful Al-Anon story, and indeed she was thinking of herself, and rightly so. It was not my style to push. I said, you know, you'll have a lot of paperwork to do. I'll go to my classes. I'll meet you downtown at lunchtime. You can brief me, and I'll advise you for the afternoon session. And to be rid of me, she said, fine. Well, I was in graduate school that summer, and I drove well fortified from the top of the Bronx to the Wall Street section of my city. It was 5 minutes after 12 lunchtime, a working day in Wall Street, and the weather was clear. Those are the things they tell you at the top of the police report. It's very important for our situations to know the weather. A United States mail truck that was parked by the curb, minding its own business, got in my way and I smashed into it. And when the policeman came on the driver's side, first word out of his mouth, sister. Now I was a little taken back by the next part. He didn't say, sister, are you hurt? Could I call someone? You think women will ever be ordained? He said, sister, could you have been drinking? And I wondered how the guy got on the police force. As was my style, officer, let me help you. I proceeded to tell the officer about my friend who was in court being persecuted, etc., etc., etc. Well, I went into a blackout, eventually a pass out. I woke up in a convent a short distance away. I woke up in a strange bed. Half my clothes on, half my clothes off. I didn't know where I was or how I got there. It was not my custom then, certainly not my custom today, to wake up in strange beds. Well, I'm around long enough to know you have your story, but time like that, we all have the same tricks of the trade. Where am I? What happened? And how do you get out of here? I could hear some talking through a partially open door, so I tiptoed over, and I'm peeking out, and I see Rose. And I knew as long as Rose was there, everything was going to be fine. The other sister, neither of us knew the lady. She was about 7 feet tall, and she was like a lunatic. She was yelling and screaming at Rose, "Your friend is on pills or she's drinking, and in order to help her, you are going to have to hurt her." I thought that was poor advice. So I took my eye and my ear in. I went back to bed to get a little rest to handle Rose, who came in and asked the going question in our lives at that time. What happened? I told it as I saw it. I lost control of the car because I was so upset about the court case. Now, in those days, the car was in my mother's name. My mother didn't know about the accident. I had the car fixed, back out on the road. 3 weeks had passed. Every time you talked to Rose, she had this question: when are we going to tell your mother about the accident? Never. Then the fears that set in for the sick, untreated alcoholic. What if Rose tells your mother? So I called Rose up, invited her out for supper, my treat, took her to a little restaurant, leaned across the table in the restaurant and said, "If you dare to tell my mother about the accident, someday you will come out of your convent, I'll be sitting in a car, and when you cross the street, that will be it." That is called threatening someone's life. Now, I always share that in my story, and one night, 100 years ago now, that means a long time, I was speaking someplace and we had a friend at the meeting. And after the meeting was over, my friend came up to me and she said to me, "Maurice, do you really think you would have run over Rose?" Do you know, up to that moment, no one had ever asked me that question. Not even Rose. I said, "Let me tell it to you this way. Of myself, no. I wouldn't hurt a fly. As a little tot, teenager, young adult, in the convent 100 years, you never knew I was around. I was always hiding out. What did I have to offer? I'm a nothing. I wouldn't harm you. But you know, you put one drink in here. The first one. And you can paint the most tragic scene you can think of. And I could be the one heading it up. And I always like to point out, because sometimes people think it's a little different because you're a sister, you're a nun. Oh, we know you're an alcoholic, but see, you're also a nun, a sister. So people think it's a little different. It wasn't that I was at Mass the next morning, or that I was reading one of my 10,000 religious books that I had in those days, and the thought came to me, "Oh, you shouldn't kill Rose." That isn't what happened. You know what happened? It was another moment of that amazing grace. Just wasn't to be part of my story, or part of Rose's, that I would run her over. And I also like to point out that after over 34 years of continuous sobriety, you put one drink in here, the first one. And you can paint the most tragic scene you can think of. And I could be the one heading it up. I don't know another situation, disease, sickness, condition like this one. How blessed are we to have been called into a way of life, given a design for living that enables us to keep that kind of a situation in check and get on with that life that God wants us to have. How blessed are we? Which then reminds me, If I fail to be grateful, I may lose the gift. And if I'm truly grateful, I will take care of the gift. Well, the disease was moving along, and one day I got a call from my boss. Now, in those days, if you got this kind of a call, it was in the same category as the Pope called you up. You never heard from the big boss. She called me personally. If she did call you personally, it was for either of two reasons. One, you were in trouble, or there was a special assignment that only you could do. So I'm driving up to see the boss, and this is my thinking. I have enough to do. We get there, we have a little chit-chat. She says, Maurice, I'll get to the point. Some of the sisters are saying that you drink too much. Now, in those days, you wouldn't dare ask a question. I asked a question. I stuttered when I asked it. I said, well, where are they? And she got a little nervous because I guess no one ever asked her a question. And she said, oh, they don't want to be mentioned. And you know, at that moment, in a very sick and negative way, I would not recommend this to anyone. I was into one of our steps, made a list. Of all people who had harmed me, and asked God to be rid of them. Well, I asked her another question. I said, do you really know anything about me? Because in those days, there was a gap between the big boss and the rest of us. She said, well, I have a file. She went over, she peeked in, and she said, oh, I didn't know you were doing this in the diocese, and you're going to get your master's degree, and you just got this award. She closed the file, and she said, you know, Maurice, I will never, ever again believe this about any of our sisters. I said, that's a good policy to follow. She gave me an apology, and off I went. And I walked back to the car, and I had one thought. It was right here. She will never, ever, ever send for me again. And she never did. Next time she arrived unannounced and put me away. So when I learned about denial, it helped me immensely. I like to keep things simple. Alcohol makes you feel fine. Therefore, you think everything is fine. Meanwhile, the people looking on are saying, oh, here we go again. When I learned that, it helped me immensely. I was angry and resentful during this time, angry with God. I had given my life to God. What more do you want? I love the word relationship. You've been my teachers about relationships. Prior to recovery, as a little tot, I put a game plan in place, trying to relate to this God, whoever or whatever he was. I come not just from an Irish Catholic family, but I come from a Vic family, which adds another dimension. Bronx Irish Catholic family. And they were always talking about God and going to heaven or going to hell and going to church. And I'm saying, who is this God? So as a little tot, I made a game plan. And I continued the same game plan all the way into the convent some years later, trying to relate to this God, whoever or whatever he was. I sat up straight, I knelt up straight, I disciplined myself. And you know, we didn't have the expression then, but the expression that would have applied, been there, done that. And then when I was drinking, it was taking God on. If you don't need me, well, I don't need you. And if I don't need someone bigger, greater, outside of this lady here, I wonder who I think I am. So I was angry and resentful with God. I was depressed during this time. I was in the convent many years before I picked up alcohol. Didn't like the taste of alcohol, didn't use alcohol. On the 5th of January, 1967, my beautiful father, Maurice, he went to God. And upon his death, when he looked eyeball to eyeball into the eyes of God, at that moment his perfection for anyone. And I believe whatever you lack, you will receive at that time. And that's how my father received sobriety, because he died of alcoholism at the age of 58. And I buried my father, and I went way inside. And I came out with a drink in my hand. And I can say quite comfortably today, my father and myself were carbon copies of one another with one big difference: the way we were to receive the precious life-giving gift of sobriety. So I was using alcohol to lift me out of a depression. I was getting more depressed. The bargaining stage, one bargain I like to share on. I got into bed one night, had my rosary beads, prayer beads, praying away, hanging on to the sheets. I'm no sooner in the bed than I have to get up and get a drink. And I said to God, I don't want to drink anymore tonight. Please help me. I'll do more work for you and for you people. Please don't let me drink tonight. Well, see, the first drink of the day always has the final say. And of course, we had that. So the covers get pushed back and the prayer beads go to the floor, and you get up out of the bed and you crawl along in the dark and you find your bottle and you do something you don't want to do, you take another drink. And after I took that drink that night, I beat that floor and I doubted the existence of God. How could a God who loved me, a God that I was to relate to? I just asked you to help me. I'll bet there's no God. I live in downtown Manhattan, right in the heart of New York City. And when I'm in town, I drive on the East River Drive, the FDR Drive, and I see our brothers and sisters, yours and mine. They're on both sides of the highway there. They build their homes there out of cardboard boxes and crates. You see them frying an egg, and they need a jacket and a pair of shoes. And they have little brown bags. I only had one kind of brown bag. They have my kind and other kinds. And if those folks, our brothers and sisters, went over to the guardrail and beat the guardrail and doubted the existence of God, we'd say, poor socks. What have they got going for them? I'm in a beautiful convent. I want for nothing, and alcohol brought me to the point where I doubted the existence of God. As we say in here, whether you come from Yale or jail, Park Avenue, Park Bench, what does it matter where you came from? I think it's very important to get to know your history, your story. But I put more energy into where do we go from here? Whatever happened this morning, yesterday, a week ago, a year ago, or 100 years ago, you have taught me to learn from the experience, but not to let it stand in the way of putting one foot in front of the other and being that person that God created you to be. And the other thing I did that night, I cried out at the top of my lungs, isn't there anybody, anywhere, who knows what I'm going through? Because each one in the throes of the sickness thinks, nobody knows what I'm going through. Well, I didn't know you were up the street and down the highway and over the mountain and across the pike going through the same thing, but I'm mighty glad that somewhere along the line God saw fit that we would find one another in this beautiful fellowship. And I truly believe it is God who has arranged our meeting. C.S. Lewis, you've heard of him. He says in one of his writings about relationships, he talks about relationships in general. And he says it's as if God says to the people in the relationship, you have not chosen one another, but I, God, have chosen you for one another. If you think of the relationships that you have in the fellowship, would you of yourself have chosen those people? Maybe yes, maybe no. I like to think it was arranged. Like happened at the Gatehouse in Akron, Ohio, some time back, with Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. And do you know, as a result of that arranged relationship, here we are this evening. It's really something when you put it all out there and reflect on it. Well, today I make bargains, deals, promises, commitments, and I follow through. I attribute that to one fact only. I don't drink alcohol while I'm sober. Very significant in Maurice's life. And the final stage is acceptance. The disease was moving along, and finally it all came to a head because I had two exceptional do-gooders in my life, my sister and Rose. And keeping it very simple, they snitched. They turned me into the boss that I had charmed a few months before. They brought the boss to my mother's where I was hiding out. I noticed the difference in the boss. She wasn't interested in anything I had to say. And she was saying things like, arrangements have been made. And they're expecting you in Lutheran General Hospital in Park Ridge, Illinois. I listened. She said you could go Friday or Saturday. I listened. Then she said you'll be there for 28 days. And all of a sudden in here, I said I won't be there for 28 minutes. And then she said, there you will find out what is wrong with you. And way in here, I said, there isn't anything wrong with me. But you know, as sick and all as we are not stupid. And I knew the only way I was going to get out of the room and away from the three people was to say I'd go. Oh, I said, I'll go. I'll go Saturday. So I went out on an AA plane, American Airlines, the way I like to go. And I met 64 charming men and women like you. And the word got around quickly that we had this Catholic sister in treatment. And one by one, you came to me, you beat up on yourself, you said terrible things about yourself. But you always finished by saying, you know, sister, this is a mistake for you. You shouldn't be in a place like this. You're not like me. Well, you know, anyone who thinks like I do, they're going to be my friend. I had a nifty getaway plan. I scrapped it. I'm not one who sits around idle. Do you know by the end of the first week, I was a therapist. And the word got around quickly. You don't like your counselor, you don't like your group, you don't like what's going on, talk to the sister. She knows everything about everything. Now, every day at 1 o'clock, we had what they call free time. Well, you know, they put big letters, free time, then they tell you what to do with it. We were supposed to stay in our room, read, write, listen to tapes. I always did as I was told. So every day at 1 o'clock, I'd be there. We had a nice table, tape recorder, pens, books. I'd block out what happened yesterday. I'd be there 2 minutes each day at 1, and I'd take the table, throw it clear across the room, go to the wall behind me, banging my head against the wall, yelling and screaming at God, why me? I've been so good, and this is what you've done to me. My roommate would run out. She'd say, she's at it again. There'd be blood pouring out of my head. They'd come in, clean me up, calm me down. I'd be fine till the next day at 1 o'clock. I was too sick then, and long before that time. Goes back as a little tot. I was too sick to hear God say, you don't have to be good. You are good. That's a given. No one has been deprived of that goodness. But where does the bad come in? Oh, that's attitude, that's behavior. I continue to chip away at my attitude and my behavior through that marvelous and wonderful process of recovery. And I do it along with folks like you. And while the process continues, a day at a time, I walk very tall. I cannot help but be impressed at the goodness and holiness that sits in this room. And if you're not there yet, borrow from me till you get your own strength. You know, I don't think there's another outfit in society that mentions the word spiritual or the word spirituality more than people in program. You want to know the key to spirituality? You want to know the key to a life-giving, healthy, meaningful spirituality? It's getting in touch with your own goodness. And the world has missed the boat with that. How blessed are we to have been called into a way of life that little by slowly, through that process, We can get in touch with the goodness, the holiness, the magnificence, the wonderfulness that God gave us when we were conceived in our mother's womb. You don't have to be good, you are good. Well, some 34 years later, and for quite a while now, I have a why me question of God. Not why me, why am I an alcoholic? But why me, God? Why am I sober? Since most people don't receive this gift. And it's a frequent question of mine. And the reason I ask it is I do not want to take the gift of sobriety for granted. I do not want my attitude to be, big deal, sober, 34 years, what else is new, a day at a time. I want to stay in touch with the gift. So God, tell me again, why am I sober? And the last time I asked him that question was before beautiful Ann introduced me up here. And he says the same thing all the time. He says, Maurice, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you. The big book says God did for him what he could not do for himself. And he says, many are called to the disease of alcoholism. Very few would drop in the bucket, are chosen for the precious, life-giving gift of sobriety. And I say, well, why me? He says, make your little chart. I make a little chart. I headed alcoholism. I put a simple line down the center. I put on this side of the chart, all of us in recovery, round the world. Fairly big number. And you put on this side of the chart, all those who are still out there. You wouldn't even see us. I find it awesome to be on that side of the chart. And I don't want to take that for granted. So I do this, why me, God? Well, I'm on that side of the chart. Why me? He says, Maurice, how do you see death? 100 years ago now, that means a long time, I sat with death. What is death all about? What is God doing? And I read a line that I had read many times before, but this time I had a moment of amazing grace. And the line is, there's a time to be born, there's a time to die, and that's on God's calendar. And I believe any person goes to God in debt, regardless of age or circumstances, when their work here on earth is finished. I do not see the God of my understanding as a yo-yo. Well, I'm taking this one and I'm leaving that one and I'm getting that one. No. I see the God of my understanding 24 hours a day as merciful, compassionate, loving. But your work is finished. I may have more work for that person to do, but on God's calendar, their work is finished. And the other thing that helps me, I'll see those people again when my work is finished. Well, the point, untreated alcoholism is still listed as an ultimate terminal condition, 100% fatal. And here we are. Well, I believe our death has been interrupted because our work is not finished. There'll be tragedy in our world tonight. Some people will go to God. Their work is finished. Others will be saved. Their work is not finished. Those who are saved, I don't know what their work is. More will be revealed to them. I believe ours is defined. It's a specialized work. With all due respect to the church, the medical profession, other forms of help, they do a lot for us. But you know what? There's just something about one member of Alcoholics Anonymous sharing with another member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like happened at the Gatehouse in Akron, Ohio, some time back with Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. So our major assignment, I believe, on any given day, I believe yours is the exact same as mine. And I believe mine is the exact same as yours. Take care of the gift of sobriety and carry a message, walk with, pass it on, be the fellowship. I believe that's my assignment on any given day. many ways to carry a message, to walk with, to pass it on. Pontificating at a podium is one way. Since we arrived yesterday, the message is being carried to me, and some folks weren't even speaking. I can look out here right now, and the message is being carried to me. That's why we're called a program of attraction rather than promotion. So very late in the 4th week, I came to grips with this, not the way I see it today, but I woke up on the 27th and a half day and there was something different about me. And I was crying and laughing and shouting, I'm really an alcoholic, because up to that moment I had been mouthing it. And I went to see my one-on-one counselor at the facility. And I said, Reverend, I'm really an alcoholic. And he did something that he never did in any of our sessions. He started dancing around the room. And he said, I have a prescription for you to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're faithful to the prescription, you will only have to return here as our guest. I said, I won't make any promises. I'll see what I can do. And by that amazing grace, as it operates in rooms like this, and my cooperation with the grace, another way of saying that, we know the program works, but if you don't work the program, it doesn't work for you. So by my doing my part, I haven't found it necessary to pick up a drink or any substitute since April 17th, 1971. I am not one who says I will never drink again. If I thought I would never drink again, perhaps I wouldn't be as faithful. So I came into the rooms and I did the old one too. I didn't drink and I went to meetings and I went to meetings and I didn't drink. I can always be found sitting in the 3rd row waiting for this thing to be finished. But they weren't going to say I wasn't there. And one night I heard a fellow share, and this is what he said. He said he learned unless he put the 12 suggested steps into his life and made some changes, he could very well lose his sobriety. And I sat up real tall, put a little smirk on my face, because I was sure he was going to say, we don't mean that for the little sister there in the 3rd row. And the man never said it. And with the help of my sponsor and some beautiful folks like you, I learned why I was so miserable. Oh, I heard you say, change or die. I used to poke the one next to me and say, isn't there something in between? No, there isn't anything in between. If you're an alcoholic, you're always in motion. We're getting weller, we're going back. We're changing or we're dying, but no big deal. We have a marvelous and wonderful process of recovery, marvelous and wonderful men and women to walk with us, and my responsibility before God, on any given day, I'll try. God blesses effort. My responsibility is to try. And so little by slowly, change started to happen and continues to happen right up to this moment, because I continue to be a student of the principles and traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I do it along with folks like you. And 3 major changes started to happen. The first had to do with the intellect. When I came to you, my thinking went like ready, fire, aim. It was my way or no way. I had postage stamp thinking. And we talked about that. And you said, Maurice, give yourself time. Work your steps to the best of your ability. Don't go it alone. And I took your suggestions, and I've had what I call an intellectual conversion up here. And then the moral conversion. I lost my value system, and we talked about that. And you said, give yourself time. Work your steps. You'll be able to put first things first, and second things second. And when you're wrong, you'll be able to promptly admit it. And you'll be able to practice the principles in all your affairs. And you'll even be able to practice the principles and you won't have affairs. And I took your suggestion and I got my value system back. And I've had what I call a moral conversion. And the third had to do with the spiritual. You were always talking about spiritual programs, spirituality. And I used to say to myself, you know, way in here, because I was very shy, I still am today. I'm glad they have something like spirituality, but see, I have religion. Do you know when I came to meetings for much of my first year, I could not walk straight into a meeting. I had to go in sideways because I had flags in my ears. Catholic, Catholic, very, very Catholic. So I had to go in sideways. And we talked about that. And you said, well, you know, our program teaches us balance. And you helped me to get centered with my religion. I have the same religion that I was brought up with. You also gave me a wonderful technique. I use it in many areas of my life, one of which is my religion. Take what helps me and leave the rest. And the other thing that happened with the spiritual, I said, all right, maybe I should do spirituality. Tell me what it is. And you said it has to do with relationships. Oh, I said, I didn't know that. You said relating to a higher power, relating to others, relating to yourself. I said, oh, I'll never have spirituality. There's nothing here to relate to. And you said, we'll help you get in touch. And you have taught me the full meaning of love your neighbor as yourself, not instead of yourself. You have taught me this above all, to thine own self be true. You have taught me, if it is virtue to love your neighbor, it must be virtue and not a vice to love yourself. And little by slowly, I got in touch with all that God had given me that I thought I was deprived of when I was conceived in my mother's womb. So today I have a life-giving, healthy, meaningful spirituality. So when God gives the gift of sobriety, I believe he says three things to us. One, I'm interrupting your debt. Your work's not finished. Carry a message, walk with, pass it on, be the fellowship. Two, you'll share relationship with these people. They will come into your life and you will come into theirs. And he says, third, with this gift of sobriety, I give you your dignity. Walk tall. So my prayer for you as you go about your journey a day at a time is that you'll continue to have your sobriety, your recovery, and as a result of that, I just know you'll have your dignity. And I close, the miracle does take place, she does finish. I close with the short version of Maurice's story, but before I do that, I just want to thank Maurice and the committee and everyone who helped out for inviting me to come and share my experience, strength, and hope. It's been an honor and a privilege. And in case you're looking for me for the next couple of days, Sister Rose and myself had to leave in the morning because we have some folks waiting for us up in New Hampshire on Friday. But anyway, it has been an honor and a privilege. And the short version of Maurice's story, I'm sure you can identify with it. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And may God, however you understand that God, may God bless you, and God bless me, and God keep you, and God keep me, because nobody does it quite as well. Thank you so very much.
What is this?